and players smiling.
But Michael Jordan is not only the best basketball player, but he's the most exciting basketball player to ever play.
Tatum fires away, pumps it in, 51 for Jason Tatum.
The Big Three NBA podcast is powered by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Three NBA podcast. I'm your host, Sherrod Blakely, and I'm joined today by the one and the only Noa Dalzell. Noa, how's it going?
It's going good. Thanks for having me.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here. And we'll talk a little bit about your podcast a little bit later on. But first, we're going to talk about this podcast, NBA Big Three podcast. And we're just going to kind of cannonball into the conversation about this whole Emirates NBA Cup, which is starting to get a little bit interesting as we kind of hit the home stretch. The Celtics with the win at Chicago, which brings their record to 3-1. So they're feeling pretty good about themselves. But before you punch your ticket to Vegas just yet, it's not quite a done deal for the Celtics to be there. Noah, give us a little bit of insight into, what's happening with the NBA Cup and just where the Celtics stand as far as getting to Vegas at this point.
Yeah, so let me pull up because Sean Grandy has the scenario. It's a little bit confusing. So the Magic need to beat the Knicks, and then there's another game that there's a very specific score outcome that needs to happen. Hold up, let me pull it up here.
Yeah, I want to say it's Milwaukee-Detroit. I think that's the other game. That's
Milwaukee-Detroit, but there's two different things that can happen for that game. He had a tweet up. Oh, here it is. Okay. Milwaukee needs to beat Detroit by 6, or Detroit needs to beat Milwaukee by 7.
Ugh.
Why that makes sense, I actually have no idea, but that's the outcome. So if we, as long as Orlando beats New York, then the exact score of that game is going to determine whether or not the Celtics get the wild card. And so I like the Cup, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but that being the outcome is just non-intuitive. Like, I can't even keep track of it, and I saw this yesterday. So there needs to be something a little more simple here, but that's what needs to happen. So there's like a 13-point margin, I guess, that can happen for the Celtics to advance, provided that Orlando beats New York too.
The one thing I do like about the Cup that really I did not anticipate it would be such a big factor is that it allows teams that, if we're being honest and candid, aren't very good as far as winning a championship. All of a sudden, they actually have something to play for during the season that they can actually build upon. I mean, right now, the Atlanta Hawks are the best team in their group, which includes the Celtics. And we all know damn well that if we're talking playoffs, if you've got a Celtics-Atlanta Hawks series, very few people outside of Atlanta are going to take the Hawks in that series. And yet the Hawks are the team that have essentially, they punched their ticket to Vegas. How do you think the competition has been so far in these Cup games? It seems, I mean, again, from where I stand, it seems like it's been a little bit more competitive than some of the regular season games, which I think is what they were aiming for with this.
Yeah, I had the same feeling last year. I feel like as the tournament continues, there's a higher level of intensity. Like, the Celtics lost their first Cup game to Atlanta without Trae Young, worst loss of the season, probably will end up being the worst loss of the season. And there was no Cup energy for the Celtics leading into that game. That being said, I do think we've seen it advance throughout this Cup run, I guess. And the same thing was the case last year. I felt like they started off really viewing it as a regular game. And then once you're in it and you've been competing in it, it's like anything like this, now that you're playing this game, even if it wasn't like, if you're a competitive person, you want to win Monopoly, right? So I think that they have a little bit of that. But I agree with you. I like the fact that teams like Atlanta last year, it was Indiana. And I thought that kind of elevated Indiana to a lot of people who maybe weren't familiar with Tyrese Halliburton and their team. So for it to be an opportunity for not contenders, but kind of middle of the pack teams that can string together some wins, but wouldn't win a 7-game series against any contender, like it is fun in that sense. I just think it should be a little bit more straightforward, just so that it doesn't come down to Milwaukee beating Detroit by 6 or Detroit beating Milwaukee by 7. But other than that, I do like the fact that there's a little something extra, and that the games also count towards a regular season win. So it's not like anybody's going to not take it seriously. Like, it's at the end of the day, you want to win a game. So I think that at the end of the day, because you're flipping through the channel like yesterday, like there's a little bit of extra something for some of these teams, the ones that are still in the mix.
Yeah, I agree that they definitely need. I think once we get past this stretch of the cup, to really look at ways to tweak it. One of the things I would love for them to do, and I think it may avoid that whole basically looking to blow out a team when you want trying to expand that point differential, like the Celtics last year against Chicago, and this year again against Chicago. We're in a situation where they were basically trying to beat this team worse than they probably would normally want to beat them because they wanted to expand that point differential. I would love to see them shift to where you get some type of advantage that you're given or points given or something to the effect if you're winning quarters.
Interesting.
Because to me, it takes a little bit away from that need to blow a team out. Like, for example, let's say you get 1 point for every quarter you win, and you're up by like 25 points in the fourth quarter, and you've already won the first 3 quarters, so you get 3 points for that. You're going to win the game. Are you more inclined to keep trying to build the score up to expand that point differential if it's no longer a factor? I just think that the point differential for me, it creates an environment that seems to be so anti what the NBA is supposed to be about. Like, you're supposed to be about gamesmanship and fair play and, not beating your opponent to a pulp when you don't have to, when in fact you actually have to do that in order to secure yourself the best position through the cup. It's one of them things that it feels a little icky when I'm watching like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum out there on the floor when they're up by 19 points with like 2 minutes to play, when even Joe Mazzulla would normally have his reserves in at that point.
Yeah, I don't honestly mind. I feel like there haven't been as many of those scenarios this year for the Celtics because they haven't blown out the cup teams. But like watching Tatum call a timeout with 1.4 seconds to go yesterday and Mazzulla draw up an after timeout play for Sam Hauser in front of a completely empty Chicago arena because none of the Chicago fans care about Boston's point differential. Like, it is a little counterintuitive. I personally hate watching the clock get dribbled out every single game, especially when there's like records on the line where someone is about to have a triple-double or there's a team that is about to break the 3-point record and then now we're watching 30 seconds just go down the drain. But, I understand like there's, norms and traditions there. And it looks like the players have been a little bit uncomfortable at times, especially last year. I felt like when they were fouling Andre Drummond versus Chicago, that was really – guys were not happy about that. But it's more just I don't think it really it's not intuitive when I'm watching this game. Like I said, I don't understand why Milwaukee needs to win by a certain amount. It's not intuitive for the average person to understand these scenarios. And NBA PR has been putting out tweets every day where they break down like, okay, these things happen for this team to clinch. And I genuinely, like, I'm reading it 5 times over and I'm like, I don't really get why this is the way that it is. So I think maybe the quarter thing or something else that's just very straightforward. You won X many quarters and X many games, and that's it.
Right.
Like, just something very basic. Will just be more intuitive for the average person, because I do worry that this is my full-time job and I can't figure this out. Like, how is the average person supposed to figure this out? And I've tried to explain it to my family and friends and they don't get it. So I think there needs to be a way to just distill it down, besides for the gamesmanship things and whether or not players like it. It's just confusing.
No, your family and your friends we're all in the same boat. This doesn't make a lot of sense to most of us. And they really do need to have a better means of just streamlining this and making it just easier to digest. I mean, you're trying to generate interest in this thing, which is great, but we kind of like to know what exactly are we supposed to make out of this. I mean, the Celtics win, they're 3-1, they're tied with Atlanta. Okay, great. But now they've got this weird thing where they've got to wait for these other teams to play. And if this team wins by this amount and that team wins by that amount, then they get in. And if they don't, then it seems a lot of confusion unnecessarily. But one thing that is very clear from that Chicago game and the winning moments of that game was our good friend Derek White was not on the floor. For those who simply relied on a box score, you saw he only played 25 minutes. Oh, well, they just gave him the day off. He had a foot injury that seemed to take him out for a little bit. I haven't seen the updates on that, but Derek White has been just a freaking Iron Man for this team. What's your level of concern, even if he's able to come back, but what's your level of concern about Derek White from a health standpoint?
I mean, I wasn't at the game, but I did see the report of Joe Mazzulla saying that Derek told him he was fine. They high-fived. He said he's not worried about it. I've learned, so this is my second year covering the team, I learned to not take take much to heart when a coach or a player says they're fine, because last year in the finals, Joe Mazzulla said that his level of concern for Kristaps Porzingis' leg injury was 0. And then obviously he came back, 3 days ago. So obviously that was a little bit more concerning. But, the fact that there wasn't a play that we saw, like there wasn't like a moment where we saw something get, like a non-contact injury or contact injury, he might have just aggravated something. So I wouldn't be worried if Derek White missed a month. Like, I think this team is deep enough to be able to afford anybody missing a month. Obviously, you just hope, because of the fact that it was, it was a sore foot. Usually the in-game, injury tags that are like sore means that they don't actually know what it is, and they're going to probably do imaging, as my impression of it. So I think just the hope that there's not actually something serious there, which I don't expect there to be, because like I said, there wasn't like a moment where we saw anything happen. If there was, nobody's found it on Twitter yet. So normally the someone will find the play, but I'm not too concerned.
Yeah, and really, of all the guys in that starting lineup, I'm least concerned about Derek White when he has any type of anything that appears on the injury report, because he's just such a freaking just Iron Man. I mean, this is a guy that has played with missing teeth. This is a guy that has had his head busted open and just went back to the locker room, got a few stitches, and he's back out there ready to, lock heads with whoever he has to guard and defend and all that. So he's one of those guys that you just don't worry about him and his injuries or potential injuries per se. But the question I have for you, though, is when you look at, his foot thing, Jalen has had a hamstring. Al Horford, Porzingis, and Drew Holiday to some extent are all on that load management type of program. What's your overall concern about health for this team in a very broad general sense? Because it seems like they've got a number of guys that have kind of these either nitpicky type injuries, or their health is being load managed this year.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of concern. I mean, there's always the regular amount, regardless of any existing, circumstances, that literally anything can happen at any moment and completely derail an entire player or team season. So that is always in the backdrop, but they've had a really healthy, knock on wood, group. And just looking around the league, it feels like half the stars are out on any given night, and the Celtics really haven't had to deal with anything substantial. I mean, even Porzingis, it ended up being 17 games. It really wasn't this massive thing that, I thought maybe it would even keep him out close to half the season. So I'm not concerned about any of the lingering things. I think Jalen's looked better. Hauser's back thing, I don't think is something to be super concerned about, because I don't think he'd be playing if it was something more concerning. But yeah, I think you just, a moment like the Derek White play where you all of a sudden, he's a guy that we kind of almost take his health for granted. All of a sudden he has maybe something that can keep him out. Maybe it's nothing, but it reminds you how much your entire season and, the championship hopes and everything really rests on nothing going terribly wrong. And, how many times things have gone wrong. And that's been the reason, we talk about the 2009 Celtics. I think I've been thinking about them a lot, because they came out so good out of the gates. They looked like they were primed to be back-to-back champions. And I think I feel similarly about this team, but all it takes is one injury to one of your most important players, and, you're not there anymore. So I think just a healthy, normal level, more so than anything that I've seen so far from this group, which is really durable. It's a very durable group of players.
Yeah, especially when you look at just, again, they've already shown the ability to win with a core piece missing at an integral part of the season. I mean, Porzingis, I think most people agreed when they were able to acquire him, felt he would be that X factor that could get them over the top and win a championship. And then they get to the finals, and their X factor is MIA for the most part because of injuries. And yet they were still able to overcome that. The one thing about this Celtics team that, again, I think is really people are kind of glossing over a little bit at this point because of how incredibly red hot the Cavaliers came out. But the Celtics have lost 3 games by a total of 10 points. That means basically there may be 2 or 3 possessions really this season from being undefeated. And they have been able to do it, I think. And check me on this if you agree or disagree with this, but it feels as though I wouldn't say that they are not taking their opponents seriously, but it seems like there's a different kind of pace to them this year. Like, they're playing well enough to beat you and leave no doubts that they're the better team, but they're not trying to beat you into the ground like it's felt like they were doing last year. Like last year, they seemed like every game, like, we need to beat you by 30 points. And if we're up by 30, hell, let's just push it to the 40 while we're at it. this year it seems like, yeah, we can go up by 30 on you, but if we can get Sam Hauser and Payton Pritchard and some of those guys off the bench a few more minutes and only beat you by 15, we're kind of good with that. What's your take on just how they seemingly have approached games this year? It seems like they're, again, from where I look, it looks like their approach is not quite, we're going to beat the crap out of you every single game. We're just going to beat you and keep moving.
Yeah, so it's funny. I think a lot of people feel that way, and that's kind of how the eye test makes you feel. But if you actually look at the numbers, their point differential is the same that it was last year. So there really hasn't actually been a drop-off. I think the strength of schedule is maybe part of it. Like, nobody's getting, hyped up because the Celtics beat the Raptors by 8, or, the Wizards or the Bulls. Like, I feel like there have been very few marquee wins this season, and that's not their fault. It's who they face, and part of it is the fact that, like, there are very few really good teams in the East right now, and so that's just going to be where the schedule takes them. But I think it's more of a result of the fact that you're not playing very formidable opponents. So there's this expectation, I think, among NBA fans that you should be blowing out the Bulls by 30. You should be blowing out the Hawks and all these teams, and that's just not really how it works. Like, the coaches and players tell us this all the time, but it's really hard to win in the NBA. It's hard to beat any team. There's talent on any roster. There's stars, and that's what I think we're seeing. We're seeing them play a lot of really bad teams in a row and win pretty similarly to how they were winning last year. And the real test is going to be when they actually go out west and play a tougher stretch of games, and even in the East, but just some more championship contenders. I don't think people minded when they beat the Cavs by 5 because the Cavs were undefeated. It's just people are got accustomed to these blowouts. But I honestly don't mind it. I think winning in different ways is always good. And just a year ago, the concern, or even less than that, 6 months ago, the concern was that they couldn't win close games. That was all anybody was thinking about. It was always like they can blow teams out or they lose. And so they've come a long way now that we're consistently seeing them, even in dogfights, pull away at the end where it's not even a 2-point win. It's like ends up being like a 10-point win because they're able to just really close games out. And that's why the point differential maybe is a little bit misleading or doesn't align with how people feel, because a lot of times it's games that are very close, and then in the last 5 minutes they just put turn it up and they make big plays, and then they win by 12, and so it pads the point differential, even though we all know from watching that it was a back and forth game. So to me, it's a reflection of how they've gotten really good down the stretch, but also of just the fact that the schedule has not been very inspiring to folks. I think just people tuning in.
Yeah, this schedule has definitely left a lot to be desired, and it's not their fault. They just play, as you pointed out, who is on the schedule. No doubt about that. Before we go any further, I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors. First off, Prize Picks, which is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars of awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this basketball season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long. And if you want in, here's what you got to do. First, you got to download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's download the app, use the code CLNS, get $50 instantly after you play your first game. Prize Picks, run your game. And you know who's been running their game all season for the Celtics? Payton freaking Pritchard. My goodness. For those who did not watch the game, who weren't sure how well Payton played, all you had to do was simply look at the damn box score, and that kind of said it all. 29 points against the Bulls, having just a phenomenal season. I have a very, without tooting my horn too much, I'm going to toot me and Bobby's horn, because we were thought to be crazy when we had to make our preseason predictions, our hot takes, if you will, and we both had Payton Pritchard 6th man of the year well before Payton had played a single game in the 2024-25 season. So shout out to Payton Pritchard for making me and Bobby Manning look incredibly smart and visionary. But you've seen Payton play a number quite a bit this year. Why has he been so impactful this year as opposed to last year or even the year before that?
I think he's just been empowered. Like, I think he's always been a great shooter. I mean, if you watched him in college, he was a great shooter. He was a great scorer. He's great with the ball in his hands. The thing that Joe will probably point to, and he said this before, is that he's gotten a lot better off the ball. And obviously playing on a team with all-stars and, primary scoring options, he's going to be off the ball quite a bit. And so that's where he's made it a point to become more effective. He said last year going into training camp that he spent all summer shooting off picks and kind of following, looking at some of the best off-ball scorers in the league to try to get better in that regard. But his bread and butter is ball in his hands. And we saw that last night. And, it's just a matter of opportunity. He played the entire fourth quarter yesterday. He had 19 points in the first 5 or 6 minutes. And, maybe he wouldn't have even been out there if Derek White hadn't been hurt. He wouldn't have played. He definitely wouldn't have played that entire period.
Right.
But this is a guy who, I've said this, I really feel so confident about his ceiling. I think he's going to be an all-star one day. I think that's what he's capable of. But when everybody in your team believes in you, they were finding him. Jaylen Brown was looking for him. Jason Tatum was looking for him. Your coach believes in you. And then the numbers back you up. I mean, he's been one of the most efficient scorers in the league this season. So it's just all those pieces have come together, and a guy that works incredibly hard. Everything we know about him is that he's one of the hardest workers out there. And now he has I don't know that he lacked the confidence. He said post-game yesterday, I don't feel any more confident now than I did a year ago when I was playing awful. Like, I feel I've always had this confidence. But now I think everybody recognizes how impactful that he can be. And so he's not like he's not like a Hail Mary. He's somebody that they actually want to play through. And it's panned out effectively so far.
Yeah, I think that the big thing with him, first of all, his confidence, I think has always been like high. This is the same guy who went up to the Celtics and basically said, trade me. Yes, I know Marcus Smart is here. Yes, I know Malcolm Brogdon is here. Yes, I know you've got all these guys here, but I should be playing. And it takes a different kind of cat to believe that I should be playing over an all-NBA defender, a 6th man of the year, and I have some really good games at Oregon, to my credit, at this point. And I've shown the ability to knock down shots. So his confidence level, I think what we're seeing more than anything else is opportunity and confidence level are finally marrying themselves to one another. And this is what we get. We're getting a guy who has stood out on a team full of standouts. And I think that, to me, that's the one thing about Payton Pritchard that I have been really, really pleased with. The fact that he has been able to carve out his own identity on a team full of very strong, dominant personalities. I mean, Tatum is going to be in the MVP conversation forever and a day. Jaylen Brown is going to be in the All-NBA conversation for as long as he's around. Porzingis, another potential all-star. Drew Holiday, Derek White, 2 of the best perimeter defenders. All those guys have their own label, if you will, that teams recognize him by. And if you're Payton Pritchard, it's like, what can I do to get into this conversation? And he's done exactly what you're supposed to do. You're not trying to be like any of those guys. You're trying to be who you are and show that who you are has value. And, it seemed kind of gimmicky there for a while when he would come in at the end of a quarter and knock down a long 3. That was kind of his thing. But he's showing he's more than just an end of the quarter shot maker.
Yeah.
And the one thing, because you have been, I think, the only person that I can think of who has thought of him as a potential future all-star. And my question to you, this is one of the reasons why I wanted you on this show to talk about Payton. Is he going to be an all-star as a Celtic, or will it happen elsewhere? Because I tell you what, I don't necessarily disagree with the potential. I wonder if it will happen here or elsewhere.
So I will say, I think entering this season, I thought that it was going to have to happen elsewhere. And last night on the Garden Report, I locked it in that I think it can actually happen in Boston.
Yes.
And I think part of it is just looking at his production. I didn't have him winning 6th man of the year this year. Again, that's not a reflection of what I think he's capable of, because I think he's really capable of anything, but I just didn't think that there was going to be that opportunity for him, those touches. And he's kind of demanded those opportunities, even when they're not there, he finds them. The end of shot clock and end of quarter heaves, I think, are what he became known for. But what those shots really are free points, like possessions that they wouldn't have even gotten a shot up, and now he's scoring. And so that's kind of, they encapsulate how he's been able to find opportunities where there aren't any. He's averaging 15.6 points per game right now on 48.5% shooting. And that's being the third guard.
Right.
Drew Holiday is a little bit older. Like, he's on a 4-year deal. Payton Pritchard is. He might be a starter in Boston, and I think a starter Payton Pritchard as a starter can very well be an all-star because he's gonna, he's only going to get better. He really is. This is his first year with like really serious minutes. Last year was his first year with consistent rotation minutes, and so I think we're just beginning to see what he can accomplish. And defensively, he's a lot less of a liability than he used to be. He's a great rebounder. He had 4 offensive rebounds last night. Like, he just makes other plays too, so he's not going to be one of those guys that just comes in to score. I think about this might be a crazy thing to say, and I didn't have the guts to say it last night, but I think about Isaiah Thomas. Like, why can't he do that? He's maybe a more well-rounded player as far as like defensively and other things. So why can't he do what Isaiah Thomas did? I'm not saying that he's going to, because Isaiah Thomas put together one of my favorite individual all-time seasons of any NBA player ever, and we all know how incredible that was. But there's a blueprint for someone to do something like that.
And along those same lines, he's a better defender than Isaiah Thomas was.
Yes, yeah.
The one thing I will say that probably hurts Peyton's chances is the fact that Isaiah benefited from an injured Marcus Smart. Because remember, when Isaiah Thomas first came to the team, he was coming off the bench. Marcus was starting. Smart got hurt. He slipped into that starting lineup, and then next thing you know, it's like 25 points a night. Marcus comes back, that starting spot, it's no longer a starting spot. You're coming off the bench, and that's kind of how the legend grew. Peyton I'm wondering if that might be the one path that Peyton could take. Because right now, as long as Drew Holiday is healthy, as long as Derek White's healthy, Peyton is not going to crack that starting lineup. And it's not because he's not good enough. Far from it. It's just that those guys they're like a well-oiled machine. And everyone has their role in that machine. And Peyton's role is coming off the bench, and he's very good at it. There will be some concerns how he would fit in as a starter. But if you've got a guy that's out with an injury, you don't really have a choice but to put him in there. I love the fact that you make that comparison, because really we haven't seen anyone on this roster since Isaiah Thomas that you could actually make a legitimate case for them being the next Isaiah Thomas in that regard.
And I know people are going to go crazy over that take. Like, I know that sounds far-fetched and crazy, but I also think that what Isaiah Thomas accomplished, if you had called that before he did it, people would have looked at you like, what are you talking about? I mean, that was the last thing anybody expected when they traded for him, was that he was going to be, in the MVP race, perennially. So, yeah, it's very possible that that's not where his career is headed, and that this is kind of what we're going to see for the remainder of his career, and that would be a very highly impactful player that could be the key to a championship run. But I don't think that's I don't think it's far-fetched to believe that he's able to scale this up, because he's been shooting really well this year. He's 44% from three, but he's also a 40% career three-point shooter, so it's not a crazy outlier. Like, I think he's a very good shooter. He's probably top maybe best or top 2 shooter on the team as far as just being a pure shooter. So I think if you scale, continue to scale things up, and also just the fact that there are so many 3-pointers in today's game, it benefits a guy like him. He's attempting more threes than I think any bench player in NBA history right now, and making more. So the evolution of the game is going to benefit him too. But it's probably going to come down to, like, there's going to need to be an injury. There's going to need to be a trade for a bigger opportunity. But those things happen. Like, inevitably, they're not going to keep Derek White and Drew Holiday forever. Drew Holiday's 34, almost 35. Maybe Derek White misses some time now. Hopefully not. But, it's going to be a confluence of things that are going to have to create that opportunity. But what I'm surprised about is that none of those things have happened yet, and he's still finding a way to be putting up these kinds of numbers.
Absolutely. And along those same lines, Payton Pritchard, I think a legitimate case can be made for him being the best bargain for guys on non-rookie deals in the NBA. I mean, he's making $6.7 million, getting 15 plus points from a backup coming off your bench on a team that won a championship and is poised to win another championship with only 3 losses up to this point by a total of 10 points. That's a major, major, major steal. Again, want to, before we go any further, want to give a shout out to another one of our sponsors, Game Time. And then for those of us who want to watch our favorite college of pro teams play and don't want to mortgage the family home to do so, the Game Time app has you covered with great ticket prices on all types of sporting events, as well as concerts. And when I'm thinking about going to a football game, and I do that now because my Syracuse Orangemen are bowl eligible, and that is what it always comes down to, getting to a bowl and being eligible for one. The first place I like to go is Game Time. Game Time has lots of really cool, awesome features that make take a lot of the guesswork out of figuring out what you want to do in terms of going to games and where you're going to sit and all that stuff. And one of the other really cool things about the Game Time app I like is the all-in pricing that shows you the total price before you get to checkout. And you get a panoramic view of the seat that you choose before you get to checkout, which is really awesome. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off. Terms apply. What time is it? Game time. It's also time for Noah and I to talk about one of our favorite players from Latvia, Mr. Kristaps Porzingis, who, again, in his second, in the follow-up to the return, looked good. 21 points, 8 rebounds. What do you like so far these first couple games since he's been back from the long off time with injury, just healing from the injury?
Yeah, I like that he's playing fearless. He doesn't look like he's tentative at all out there. And we knew that was going to be the case because he's come back from so many injuries. He's like a pro at coming back from injuries and doing so without missing a beat. And we're seeing that again. I also like the fact that there's a guy on the roster who has a completely different shot profile than the rest of the team, and that you can feed it to him and it looks aesthetically very different. And I think fans were clamoring for maybe some diversity in shot profile for the Celtics, for aesthetics, if nothing else, because what they were doing was working. And he has not strayed away from the moves that I think we all fell in love with last year when he got traded to Boston, like the swing through move, the post ups, and he's been super efficient, shooting 56.5% from the field in 2 games. So really hasn't missed a beat. He's looked healthy. I think that he has looked a little bit out of shape at points, like he's kind of gasping for air, which is understandable. He hasn't played an NBA game in a very long time. But overall, I think this is what, 2 games in, but this is all you could hope for him to come back this early and to look really this good since returning from that rare, bizarre leg injury.
Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised at just the efficiency that he's been able to make shots. Because usually when guys come back from a long layoff, there's going to be the fatigue factor, as you pointed out, that, just getting your wind back. It's players, they've said this for the beginning of time, that there's being in shape and then there's being in basketball shape, and the two are not one and the same. And Porzingis is working his way back into basketball shape. But typically along that journey, guys but it takes him a minute or two to kind of get their shot making rhythm back. And he has not missed a beat. And I think it goes back to something that you pointed out. He's a pro at bouncing back from injuries. Remember when he had missed time, latter part of last season, he comes back in the playoffs in his first game. You would think that he was in midseason form by the way that he was knocking down shots. And I think, again, there's a reason why, he has the nickname Unicorn, because he's different. And I think one of those differences is his ability to just, frankly, inject himself into whatever the team needs from him at that particular moment. And he's on a team now where they don't need him to go out there and get you 25 points, 10 rebounds, 3 block shots a night. They just need him to be a presence more than anything else. And him being a presence is going to open up a lot of shot opportunities for him and for others. So I've been pleased at how well he is just kind of basically, hit the ground running, and he's only going to get better. And I think he has absolutely become the cheat code for the Celtics going forward, because they were pretty damn good without him. And now that he's back in the mix, he becomes another wrinkle for teams to worry about as far as how can we beat the Celtics? How can we compete with the Celtics? So I've been very, very pleased with what we've seen out of him. And along those same lines, another group that I'm trying to learn a little bit more about, and again, I'm going to lean on your expertise in this regard, and that is the G League, the Maine Celtics. What are there some storylines that we should be following or keeping an eye on with them that the average Celtics fan that just is probably not as locked in as they should be with that team?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that the main Celtics have one of the best players in the G League, and that's JD Davidson. JD Davidson is in a really unique situation in that he is, I think, the first player in NBA history that's been on 3 consecutive 2As, and 2As are relatively new, but he's been on 3 consecutive 2As with the same team. And there was, I think, probably his hope was to, have a guaranteed deal heading into the season, but that this franchise has stuck with him and he's stuck with his franchise. And in turn, he's putting together a really phenomenal stretch of basketball. He's so fun to watch. He just manages the game masterfully. And I think that he benefits these other guys that are in and out and, in Boston, in Maine, on the team, not on the team, because he just runs the show really effectively. He's averaged 24 points and 10.3 assists per game so far this season. He's been really efficient, 46% from the field. And he just looks to me like he's too good to be in the G League, but then he's still not an NBA player. And whether he's going to be an NBA player, I think is the big question. I was up there 2 weekends ago when the Celtics weren't playing, and I went to a couple of games and talked to a bunch of people and talked to his head coach, Tyler Lashbrook, who is also one of the player development coaches in Boston, who was in Boston last year. And he said, he's really, really close to being an NBA player. And I was like, what's holding him back? Is there a thing? And, he didn't share. But I think that defensively is where there might be a gap. He's not a Pritchard level defender, but he's Pritchard size. And so there's a question of is there room for somebody that's that size, but not an elite defender? I don't know. That's the question in the NBA, if he can make that adjustment. But he's grown every year that he's been in Maine, and he's a legend in Maine. And I know that sounds funny. I wrote an article about JD Davidson being a Maine Celtic legend, and a lot of people messaged me being like, this seems like a backhanded compliment. And that was not my intention. The intention is that he broke the all-time franchise scoring record. Right. He has the all-time assist record. He has every record you can think of. And when he walks into that building, that Portland Expo, which is like a high school gym, he is the man. He is the star. Everybody loves him there. They're lining up for photos and autographs. And so it's just a funny background story for people that are really clued in to know that this guy is he's a star in Portland. And if he makes it to the NBA, he's going to have a big following from Portland that's going to follow him wherever he goes, even if it's not Boston.
Yeah. And sometimes I think people forget how good he was coming out of high school. I mean, he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. And to get a guy that, the Celtics got him as a late second-round pick, in part because he didn't have a very good freshman season at Alabama, and then he made the decision to turn pro anyway. And the Celtics drafted him with every intention of developing him over time. But I think the biggest thing I think that has hurt him more than anything else is opportunity. And you can't really knock the Celtics for not giving him a more expansive opportunity, because think about something. I mean, he's played behind Payton Pritchard, who played behind Marcus Smart, who played behind Malcolm Brogdon, and then you got Drew Holiday. I mean, you look at the guys that are playing for the Celtics that are taking minutes away that he could potentially have. You can't argue that he should get any of those minutes. Those guys are just appreciably better in every sense of the word. I give the Celtics credit for being patient with him and just really allowing him to grow. And I give JD, credit for understanding that this is a process. I mean, he would be, I believe, a senior in college right now if he hadn't turned pro. So this is a guy that in every sense of the word could potentially be playing, at Alabama or another college at this point. So it's taken him some time to develop, but the thing that he has that from what I've seen in summer league and even in the few stints, with the Celtics, physically speaking, he's bigger than he may appear to be.
Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of like low key linebacker build. Not
he is, yeah.
And I think he has yet to figure out how to utilize that strength that he has. I would love to see him become more of a bully ball basketball player. He's not going to be towering over guys with his size as far as height, but he's strong enough where he can use that strength to create space. Kind of reminds me, not quite as thick, but Bledsoe, who played for the Milwaukee Bucks a few years ago. Similar, very strong guy who used his strength to create space for mid-range shots or use his strength to create space, getting to the basket. I think JD could potentially be that type of player. But, at some point, as you pointed out, Drew Holiday, Derek White, even Payton Pritchard, they're not going to be here forever. It's just a matter of will they be here, or will JD be here long enough to where he can get an opportunity to play some of those minutes? So that's a good one. That's a really good one to keep an eye on.
And he's the second youngest player on the Maine Celtics, which is crazy.
Wow.
This is his third year. So he's just 22. Like, Baylor Shireman and Anton Watson are both drafted. I think they're both 24. And so he's a veteran for the G League, but he's still really young. And so what he hasn't done so far in the NBA is not an indictment on what he's not going to be able to do. At least that's looking at it positively, I guess.
Yeah. And let's take a real quick trip around the NBA. And I want to start with the Milwaukee Bucks, who are actually playing rather well. They've won 5 in a row. How good do you think this Bucks team is at this point?
Honestly, I think they need Chris Middleton to be Chris Middleton. I love Chris Middleton's game. I thought last year his playoff performance was super underrated. He was really the only reason why Milwaukee even had a chance versus Indiana. And his health is a complete question mark. Nobody really understands ever what is going on with his health. But I think right now, whether he's going to come back and what form he's going to be in is the real thing. So to me, if he's healthy and he's even remotely the player that we know he can be, especially in the playoffs, they're a legit team. They should be a legit team, and I think they've really underperformed to date. But without him, I think they're missing a piece. I don't know that they are a legit team without him. So Damian Lillard and Giannis just together have never been, still to this point, have not been the duo that I think we imagined on paper they would be when the trade happened. But even if they're not that duo, I think that they're still this team still has a relatively high ceiling, especially considering how weak the East has been.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're nearing the quarter mark of the season, and that's when everyone coming out with their first quarter grades and all that other stuff. But everything to me in the East is relative to the Celtics. We know Cleveland is a legitimate threat to Boston East, obviously with their record. But when you look at Orlando, you look at the Knicks and the Bucks, as we just talked about, of those 3 teams, Orlando, New York, and Milwaukee, which of those 3 teams, if you're the Celtics, you're the most concerned about?
What are the 3? Orlando, Milwaukee.
Orlando, New York, and Milwaukee.
Damn, Cleveland snub.
Well, no, Cleveland.
Okay.
I can't. Cleveland is a threat.
You're putting them. Okay.
Yeah, they've already moved on to the second round of teams the Celtics have to worry about. Who should join them between Orlando, New York, or Milwaukee?
This might be a crazy answer, but I think maybe Milwaukee, potentially. Like not the Milwaukee that we've seen so far, but if Milwaukee pans out, I think in a playoff series they have the best chance.
Yeah.
They really might not pan out. I don't know. What do you think?
See, I think Milwaukee too, and here's why. Of the teams of those 3 teams, Orlando, New York, and Milwaukee makes me nervous because they have the kind of upside that frankly we're not seeing right now. Like they're playing without a key member of their core available. And if you're playing them in the playoffs and he is available, they become a very much more difficult team to beat. I think Orlando is going to be good. They're tough. They're definitely feisty. But I'm not sold on them in a best of 7 being able to beat the Celtics. Not even close. And the Knicks, I think the Knicks would, frankly, they would overhype themselves for a series against Boston to the point where they would get too fired up and too amped up for that series and make a lot of silly, stupid mistakes that the Celtics would easily capitalize on and make that series, which should be a 6 or 7 game series, probably more like a 5-gamer because of a lot of the mistakes that they would make and not necessarily anything the Celtics would do. Whereas Milwaukee, because they have a core veteran group, guys who've been there, done that, they're just a much more difficult team to knock off their game than those other 2. And again, with no Middleton, you just don't really know what does a complete Milwaukee Bucks team look like. And that, if you're the Celtics, that to me, that's something that you definitely would be concerned about. So
yeah, that's what it is to me too. And I just think Giannis is ultimately playing at an MVP level right now. Like that's the best player of any of those teams. Giannis is going to be the best one. So,
Right.
But to be honest with you, I don't really think any of those teams can pose too formidable of a challenge to Boston. I don't know. Maybe I'm overly confident, but I haven't seen anybody in the East that I think is a legitimate threat. Whereas I think there's a couple teams in the West that are.
Yeah. And I want to talk about Western Conference specifically. I want to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. They have been rolling quite well of late. They're now 4th in the West. And my question to you, are you buying or selling them as a top 4 team in the Western Conference?
Top 4 team. I think they're going to hover around there. Who is it right now? It's OKC.
You got OKC,
Houston,
Golden State, and Houston. Those are the 3. OKC, Golden State, and Houston.
And then Memphis is 4
and
right now.
And then Memphis is right behind them.
I don't think they'll be in the top 4.
Okay.
I think we're going to see a team like Denver maybe go up a bit. They've been without Aaron Gordon. I think Jamal Murray's underperformed. They'll be in that mix though. I think they'll be in that middle range. They're an interesting team. They've played so differently. I feel like some guys have had much better years than in previous years. Guys like Desmond Bane have not had as good of a year. But they're pretty fun to watch. It's fun to do on any given night. I feel like they have different guys that have gone off, and that's made for fun TV. They're probably like a middle of the pack playoffs, and definitely a good bounce back year from them after what we saw last year.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the ceiling for them is 4. I think right now they're playing from where they're going to be positioned in the West as well as they could possibly play. I see them really 5 or 6 in there. In the team that's in 5th right now, the Denver Nuggets, I definitely see them moving up a spot and getting home court at least through the first round. And
the tough thing is like, no, go ahead.
You got
I was just going to say, like, having Minnesota as the 11th seed, I don't think anybody would have predicted that after the year they had last year, and whether that's a product of a trade that could go down as an all-time bad trade if things don't get better or something else. But I expect them to be a top 4 team when it's all said and done, even though right now it certainly doesn't look like it.
Yeah. I tell you what, though, if you are a team out West, you don't want to see Minnesota in the first round. If you're like Oklahoma City, Houston, or Golden State, any of those top 2, top 3 teams, the last thing you want to do is see Minnesota in that first round, because I think there'd be a lot of action taken against you. Teams picking them to knock you off, especially if it's like a Minnesota-Houston where, you know, Houston's having a great season, but they got so many young guys. You just don't know if they're playoff ready just yet.
Yeah.
But back to Memphis, Memphis is an interesting team. I thought they would be my surprise team this year, a team that would finish, you know, relatively high in the West. I have them finishing 5th, so I don't see them as a top 4 team. I could see easily, you know, Minnesota getting on one of those heaters where they win like 10 out of 12, and next thing you know, they go from 11th to like 4th. I could see the Phoenix Suns, you know, if they can get healthy and get right, I could see them absolutely getting in the mix. The Dallas Mavericks have been just kind of a weird team for me this year. Luka hasn't made the progress I expected him to make after coming so close to winning a championship. I mean, he basically looks like the Luka we've seen every year in terms of health, in terms of impact, in terms of making guys around him better, which I don't think he does a very good job with. And so Dallas has been a bit of a disappointment, but they've got the potential to really, really turn it on at any given moment and be, you know, a team that can make some noise come playoff time.
It is pretty remarkable that the 2 teams that were in the Western Conference Finals are both out of the playoff picture right now. I don't know that we would have, and again, it is really early, and a lot of times when you go back and look at the standings in November, you're like, I remember when this team was in the mix and they're not even in the, you know, they're not even in the top 8 anymore. But yeah, I did not expect the Mavs and the Wolves to be the 7th and 11th seed respectively, which is where they lie right now. And I do think that kind of things will level out and they'll go up there. So some of the teams that maybe have outperformed expectations a bit might take a little bit of a dive. But we'll see. The Thunder are the one team that really stands out to me in the West. Like, I think that they're very legitimate. They're very well-rounded. They don't really have any major holes.
Right. Absolutely. And before we go, I want to make sure, Noah, that you let them know about your podcast and either the most recent episode or episode you got coming up. The floor is yours.
Yeah. My podcast is I just go live a couple times a week on off days, just to do any questions people have. So it's called UAD Boston. You can find it on CLNS Media, CLNS All Access, or on my YouTube channel, UAD Boston. And you could just tune in. And if you have any questions or anything particular that you want to talk about, that's kind of the whole premise of the show. So You can find me there. You can also find me on the Garden Report post game, and all of my writing is on SB Nation.
Absolutely. And Noah is our resident expert on all and any WNBA action, which is this was a great season. And there's so many storylines going into next year that I'm super excited about when they get that season kicked off again, because this was a really, really good season. And I think it's only going to get better.
It was such a fun first year covering the league. The WNBA, I think, is primed for continued growth here.
Absolutely. And before we get out of here, just want to give one more shout out to our good friends at Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of CLNS Media Network. Also, shout out to our good friends at Game Time, which takes the guesswork out of buying last-minute tickets to your favorite sporting events and concerts. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, Noah, you did it. We did it. We made it through another episode of the Big 3 NBA podcast. Again, before we get out of here, I want to thank our guest, Noa Dalzell, who was amazingly awesome as always. Much appreciated. You can check. Me. No problem. So again, that's it for this week, and we'll be back next week. We'll be talking about probably the Celtics in that great game against the Cavaliers coming up. The top two teams in the East going at it again. Can the Celtics hand the Cavaliers another L, or will the Cavs get a little bit of revenge off of their first L of the season, which came at the hands of the Celtics? We'll see. Sherrod Blakely, Noa Dalzell. This is the Big 3 NBA podcast. Take care.